Today, when people hear Apple, they most likely think of iPhones or even the face of the Apple company, which is Steve Jobs. But behind all of this glitz and glamour was Steve Wozniak. He was the engineer who actually built Apple and its products from the ground up. Affectionately, he's known as the Woz, and he's an engineering genius who actually made personal computers possible for every day. Steve Wozniak was born in 1950 in San Jose, California, and he grew up in what is now known as Silicon Valley, which is basically a technological hub, a hub for innovation. It's where Apple and Google were founded, so it's well known for its technological and kind of mechanical engineering kind of things. His father worked as an engineer, and so from an early age, Wozniak was exposed to engineering and how things actually work. When he was younger, he would actually take apart electronics and reassemble them just to see how they worked and what was inside of them. By the time he got to high school, he started designing computers on paper, so like sketching them. And this was before he actually saw one or actually was able to work with the tools. But then in 1971, after he had gone to college, he ended up meeting Steve Jobs, and they clicked, and Jobs had kind of the ideas, and Wozniak had the knowledge and the engineering knowledge to know how to actually make them possible. So they started building computers and ultimately designed the Apple I, which was something that Wozniak pretty much designed by himself. And it was a computer that was small and affordable. It had its own, it was able to be connected to its own keyboard and router at the time. And so people could use it at home. It was revolutionary for the time period that it was made in. They sold the computer to local stores, but they began selling them actually out of Steve Jobs' garage. And so by that time, Apple was official. It was becoming its own tech company. So then after creating the Apple I, soon after, he created the Apple II, which was one of the first mass-produced personal computers. It had its own keyboard, and it was able to connect to a TV, and it had color graphics, and it was also very accessible to use as far as the interface. So Apple II was a huge success, and it made Apple one of the most important tech companies in history. So even after Apple became a global name, Wozniak ultimately stayed humble. He left the company in the mid-1980s. He returned after a plane crash in 1981, but ultimately left the company in 1985 and got his bachelor degree in science in 1986. And his bachelor degree was actually in electrical engineering and computer science. So he ultimately, after his stint at Apple, began focusing on philanthropy, and he also created his own company, which had universal remotes. Unfortunately, it did not take off as he planned, but he still had stakeholders and shareholders in the Apple business, and ultimately still provided advising and support for the executives. So his impact is felt throughout the nation, throughout the world. He was creative, he was generous, and he had a passion for technology. And he showed to the world that you don't have to be the face of a company, you don't have to be the CEO to make a huge difference. So he was really a behind-the-scenes worker, but he ultimately contributed greatly to the success of Apple. Apple wouldn't be what it is today without Steve Wozniak.